Dear friends, before I invited and do a formal welcome, I just wanted to draw your attention to a few technical matters. Everyone is muted. We'll open the chat and unmute as appropriate. You're still able to chat to the hosts if you have any technical difficulties. You may choose to be in gallery view or to view the speakers. And if you choose to choose the speaker view, you can choose that by using the speaker view or clicking on the picture of the speaker and just choosing spotlight or pinning them. We will be recording, so if you don't want to be recorded, please stop your video and feel free to rename yourself for anonymity. It's really lovely to see beautiful faces online, and it's beautiful to connect, seeing your faces. But if you, for your own comfort, if you want to be online, you're welcome to choose to turn your videos off. Let's use this opportunity to take refuge in our breath and becoming aware of the emotions that may arise. As an introduction, as we don't really have the space to do formal introductions today, you may wish to rename yourself, indicating your pronouns, and perhaps where you're zooming in from this evening, this morning, or this afternoon. You can look at my picture as an example of what is achievable. Dear beloved teachers, monastics, ancestors, elders, descendants, and all and every part of you, really big warm welcome to tonight. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Rahina, and my Order Dharma name in the Plum Village tradition is True Deep Source. Gareth, Satya, and I are supporting this event today. And this event has been the culmination of the energies of many, many people from around the world. And I want to appreciate them all. Not all of them are here today. The last month has brought home to us the significance and the criticality of our breath. The breath is also one of the foundational teachings of the Buddha across many traditions. We live because we breathe. But from the time the breath enters our body, Arundhati Roy says, it becomes political. In this time, we see the stark reality of what it means to be Black and brown, of what it means to breathe as a Black and a brown person. We have witnessed and experienced and seen how racial injustice and systemic inequalities have disproportionately impacted Black, brown, and Indigenous. And we've seen in this time how truly interconnected we really are. The exhale of a breath in China affects us around the world. The erasure of the breath in a Black body in Minneapolis is felt in bodies all around the world. Our breath is also the source of our liberation, the source of our healing. It can help us gain insights into our state of mind, calm our body, give us space to choose our reactions as we deal and live in the world around us. For us to move to become a more inclusive and just society, we need to re-examine, to heal, to come home, to decolonize our own minds, alongside tackling the systemic injustice that exists in the society around us. for each one of us, that journey will be different, as in this moment, the breath that each one of us is taking is different. Our breathing also brings us to skillful action. How we engage and act in challenging social injustices or tackling the ecological crisis is as important as what we do. The means and the end are one, says Thich Nhat Hanh. The type of breath we want to take in the future is determined right here in this moment. Will we breathe out using the energies of anger, fear, prejudice, hate, grief, and oppression? Or will we choose a different way? Martin Luther King said, the antidote to hate is love. And the basis of that love, Bishop Desmond Tutu said, comes from understanding and healing. Not conflict resolution solutions, but deep reconciliation within ourselves and in the world we live in. It is only then that we can truly have justice. Cornel West reminds us that justice is the way we show love in public. So how will you breathe on this journey? We may not have created the issues we face, but we have the power to change it, one breath at a time. Today, we have the amazing Dr. Larry Ward and Amaragita to offer their deep experiences and wisdom on this journey of healing. The long walk home, the long walk to freedom, walking towards justice and healing. Before they share, we will commence with a short, silent breathing meditation. And between the sharing of Amaragita and Dr. Ward, we will have a few minutes break, after which you will have the opportunity to ask questions before we end at 8:30 British Summer Time. So take a few minutes and just settle into a position that's comfortable for you. Today we will sit for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, the time it took for the breath of George Floyd to leave, to end, to cease. And as we become aware of our breath today, we see where it is landing in our body. Is it agitated? Is it calm? Is it long? Is it short? Every breath we take is a gift. Every breath we take for ourselves, we take for our family, and we take for our loved ones. It is also a breath we take for those who themselves can no longer breathe. And when we breathe for courage, for healing, for strength, and the love that we have for our humanness. We breathe to heal, coming over and over to the breath when our mind wanders. I will invite the bell to commence and a bell to end. Thank you, dear friends. We'll move to hearing from Amaragita this evening, this morning, or this afternoon. Just as brief introduction, Amaragita is an ordained member of the Triatna Buddhist community. She is also the chair of the Buddhafield, this amazing festival that happens this year globally, actually, rather than in London. She has many, many years, tens and decades of experience as a trainer and a coach. She's been the co-founder of a charity known as GRIT. I love the acronym. And I've not met Amaragita before this event, but I've taken some time to watch her talks on YouTube. And I was touched by her passion, her tenderness, her commitment to social action, her work with Extinction Rebellion, and her vulnerability in leaning into her own discomfort, and her strong and deep-hearted commitment to Buddhist engaged action. So I'd like to hand over to Amaragita, and we're delighted to have her here in a hectic schedule. She is based in Devon this evening, and I look forward, as I'm sure you are, to hearing her this evening. Thank you. Over to you, Amaragita.
Thank you very much, Rahina. That was a spectacular introduction. I hope I can live up to it. Yeah, I feel very honoured to have been asked to come and speak, and thank all of you. I think we're 94 people on the call. Thank you all for tuning in, because these conversations we've been having some of these conversations within my Buddhist order, calling them courageous conversations about race. So for anyone to show up to these conversations takes something, because you know, it's not going to be an evening at the comedy show, is it? You know, there's just so much that is really weighty to be reflecting on, taking in. So I just really want to thank you for listening, for wanting to listen and for wanting to engage with these issues. Just say a little bit about myself. I'm 58. I'm mixed race. My mother is from Trinidad via Africa. My father is English. And I grew up in the 70s and 80s with a lot of conversation with my mother about many things happening in the States and in Brazil. My mum and dad met in the Caribbean, and then they lived together in Brazil at the time where they were still pretty much, pretty much an apartheid system within Brazil, informal. And, I grew up in different parts of the world. I traveled around South America. I lived in Switzerland for a while. I lived in the Caribbean. And I have to say that my mother was always, she declared herself a communist at the age of 19 and gave the nuns in her convent hell. So she was a real social justice warrior, and she taught me an awful lot about what it is to connect with all people, and to really educate me about racism. She loved the work of Angela Davis, the Soledad brothers. She educated me a lot as I grew up. And in the, at university, I became an activist. I worked with the Africa Society. I worked with the Palestine Society. I was a feminist. We did a lot of work around all kinds of things. My mother started a Saturday school for Black children in Oxford, where she lived. And always there was this background conversation about racism, about social justice, and what we could do to make a difference to this. In the 70s, I also was part of, as a trainer, I did a lot of anti-racist work. There was different kind of rounds of anti-racist work that did the rounds of NGOs and charities. And I worked a lot within the charity sector at a time when, there was a lot of ferment in the 80s. There was a lot of amazing things going on. One of the things that we did was we created a women's training center with a lot of people, women of color, training in non-traditional skills. I mean, there was just a lot going on in the 80s and 90s, and I felt very at the forefront of a lot of what we were doing at that time. But what happened during that time was that it felt like being involved in politics and in those sorts of activist movement, I kept coming up against ways in which people polarized with each other. And this was kind of bemusing to me, that although what we wanted to do was to change the world, what we wanted to do was to make a difference, what we ended up doing was kind of spiraling ourselves down into a very difficult place where we could no longer work together, because all the divisions between us, between working class, between middle class, between white, between Black, between lesbian, between straight, all of these different divisions, within, sort of the London scene that I was working on, as well as creating many, many amazing positive things, where it ended me up was in a place of feeling, this is important work, but it's not my work, because you know, my sense of what I wanted to do was contribute from a place of love. So I kind of jumped ship to the Buddhists from the political world. And I jumped in and faced again a situation that a lot of people of colour face when they move into a Sangha, of being pretty much the only person of colour in their Sangha. And that was painful. And I vowed to myself that I wasn't going to be the only one. I don't want to be here in the Sangha as the only black person. So I started organising and running people of colour retreats. And that was about 30 years ago that we started running people of colour retreats. So those were very, very important, as I'm sure a lot of people here have heard and have seen the value of those kinds of retreats. But here we are in 2020, in the wake of Black Lives Matter, in the wake of COVID, and in the wake of the environmental crisis. And as a Buddhist, and as someone who's been practicing and ordained for 30 years, you know, the question is, what now? You know, what now? What can I do to really make a difference? What is important to me? And what do I even say? You know, I've read so many books, I've listened to talks, you know, there's so much out there, and yet it still feels like a colossal task in front of us, even though we've made massive gains over the last 30 years. We have. Sitting where we are right now, looking out into the world, it's heartbreaking. It's still heartbreaking. And it just reminds me a little bit about the story of Avalokiteshvara, who, you know, makes this vow to save all beings, and he's working at it, and working at it, and working at it, 100 year after 100 year after 100 year, and then looks down and sees still so much suffering, and his heart breaks. He breaks into 1,000 pieces, because it's just unbearable that even after all the work he's done as a bodhisattva, there's still so much suffering, so much inequality, so much cruelty, so much pain. And what is he to do? What are we to do? You know, what are we to do? So that's a really good question, and I'm sure that's part of the reason that some of you have tuned in. It's like, we've got our practice. Some of us are politically active, some of us are socially active. We already, I'm guessing we already are doing a huge amount. And then, you know, we're still looking at, you know, all the suffering that's still present. So obviously what I've, in reflecting about that, what I've ascertained is that, you know, there are no easy answers, and there are no off-the-peg solutions to all of this. And there are a lot of amazing people doing a lot of fantastic work. But for me, I think the most important work, the deepest work, is leaning in and facing in to my existential vulnerability as a human being. And the fact that in 8 minutes and 46 seconds, our life can be over, and that in so many ways, you know, our time on this earth is very, very fragile. You know, the impermanence of the human being, how do we deal with that impermanence? And it seems like we're designed to try to survive and not face and not feel the vulnerability of the human condition. And because it's so precarious, if we really, really look and really, really feel, it's so precarious, then this conditioning comes in of how do we survive it. And I was thinking about, you know, the policeman whose knee was on George Floyd's neck, and I was looking at a film called White Right about an Asian woman who went and talked with neo-Nazis, and got this image of this bird, of what happens when birds are fighting with each other over territory, and they kind of puff themselves up into this ball of feathers and make themselves look much bigger than they are in order to keep their territory. So we've got this need, this deep human need to show up and protect our resources, to show up and feel like we're better, we're stronger, we're superior in some way. And that the differences between people, the racial differences particularly, are then used, they kind of turbocharge this need to be protected. And then we use this as a reason, as an excuse. We use this narrative to ensure that the people like us, or the people who we align ourselves with, have access to the resources that we think is going to make us happier. So for me, that is as a Buddhist, what we're trying to look at is an existential, individual, figure ground reversal from being a being that is consumed and predominantly conditioned for survival to one which has dissolved the fetters that keep us tied into that way of thinking and that way of being. And that individual way of being has translated into this society where we are hoarding resources and keeping resources in a way which ultimately we can now see is destroying the planet. All the activities that we think are going to keep us safe actually have ended up bringing humanity to a place of existential catastrophe. There is ecocide and mass extinction events happening all over the world. And what's needed, what's being called for, is a deep turning around, a figure ground reversal in this basic misunderstanding of who we are. Basic misunderstanding that if we guard, protect, keep hold of these things, we will be safe. And the truth is that nothing will make us safe. Nothing will be enough. But we're still in a pattern of thinking that consumption and consuming is going to be what does it for us. So this deep conditioning that we have on an individual level and on a level of society, how do we begin to face into that? How do we begin to keep working in ways that strengthen the ties between us rather than weaken the ties between us? And is it too late? Is it too late to catch a new wave of being, given the significance, how much I've been reading today, we have sort of 6 months possibly in terms of really big tipping points in the environmental movement of what will happen. And already many Black and brown people's countries have been devastated by climate change. And that is where I think it's really important to link the environment with the movement for racial justice, because the people whose lives are most at risk, whose livelihoods are most at risk with climate change, which is already taking place now, which is going to cause mass displacement of individuals and the potential for even more nationalistic ideas and protective ideas. How do we relate to that? How do we feel about that? How do we face that? And as I was sort of thinking about this, what do I say? What do I say to my children? I have 2 children, teenagers. You know, what do I say to them about this? And I think for me, the most important thing that I can think about is there are many different levels that we can just keep working on. You know, there's the level of me personally. I feel the need to become an activist again, to go and put my body and, you know, my resources so that, you know, we can speak out and say what's going on environmentally. And that's why I've been part of Extinction Rebellion. But that's not for everybody. There's many different things that we can do. Giving money, signing petitions, changing laws, working within organizations. There's many different things that can be done and have been done. But for me, the most important thing is sharing and being willing to acknowledge vulnerability, and being willing to take the example of the Buddha, and the example of the Buddha in terms of how he used resources, and how the image in my mind that inspires me the most is the Buddha's having 1 bowl and 2 robes, and him saying, that is enough, this is enough, training my mind, creating a figure ground reversal, so I am no longer a being of fear, but I have become a being of love, a being of generosity, opening my heart to a new possibility of what it is to be human. So it seems like, you know, both works are necessary, the outer work and the inner work, which I'm sure is what many people already know. And the questions, you know, I really love questions. And in terms of us having these discussions with each other, being willing to be in the fear of having these conversations together, because there is a lot of fear associated with just having conversations across different racial groups, across different denominational groups, having these conversations about what divides us. And the question that I like to ask myself really is, who am I when I give up guilt? Who am I when I give up blame? And who am I when I let go of my fear of getting it wrong? So those are the questions that I like to ask myself in order to be open to having courageous conversations that begin to change the narrative and begin to, well, not really begin to, but continue this path of exploring who we are as human beings and how we can deal with our existential fear of surviving and what will allow us to survive. And how do we not use the differences of other people as a way to justify hoarding resources and treating people with a lack of dignity and respect and with a lack of justice. So those are some of my thoughts on racial justice and healing. And I hope that they've been in some way helpful to you. Thank you.
You'll have the sound of the bell. Dear friends, I know you've been sitting for a little while now, so if you'd like to take this opportunity of maybe 2 or 3 minutes just to stretch, to stand up, to get a drink of water. And then we will come back to listen to Dr. Larry Ward. Thank you. Dear friends, welcome back. I hope you managed to do a little bit of a stretch. As you were having a break, you no doubt read the quotation on the slide that comes from Dr. Larry Ward's new book, which is on pre-order. I'm going to do an introduction to Larry by reading something that I found as an excerpt of his book. Shot by the police as an 11-year-old child for playing baseball in the wrong spot. As an adult, Larry Ward experienced the trauma of having his home firebombed by racists. At Plum Village Monastery in France, the home of exile of our beloved teacher, Vietnamese peace activist and Zen teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, Dr. Ward found a way to heal. He says in his book, our racial past echoes through the air that we breathe and permeates the ground on which we walk. This fragmented consciousness predates our birth, but still flows through our neural networks, the veins of our being. Our racial suffering is deep and wide. It is a particular kind of samsara, repeated cycles of bitterness, pain, and fear. It is sustained by our conditioning, both individual and collective. It is the undercurrent of a failed paradigm of aggression, ownership of peoples, and enduring institutionalized racism. This failed paradigm of views presents us with a profound opportunity to rebuild the shape of our thinking, our speech, and action, as we must, we can, and have to redefine what it means to be a human being. This failed paradigm of views provides us a profound opportunity to rebuild the shape of our thinking, speech, and action, as we can and must redefine what it means to be human. And with those words, I hand over to Dr. Larry Ward, a senior teacher in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh and a respected elder. Thank you. Please feel free to let me know if you want me to invite the bell at any time.
Okay, thank you. Well, good peace to all of you, whatever zone of time you may be in at this moment. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I live in Taos, New Mexico, the ceded land of the Tiwa people. I carry with me 4 photographs that help my practice every day. The first one is of my mother, Viola Paris, part African-American, part Cherokee, who adopted me when I was 8 months old and taught me how to love a stranger. I carry a picture of Thich Nhat Hanh, my teacher in the mindfulness path. I carry with me a picture of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of great compassion, standing on the head of a dragon, meaning wisdom, in the midst of the waves of birth and death, and at the same time gathering the tears of all beings, and through her own practice, transforming those tears into the nectar of healing. My last photograph I carry is of Lucy. And Lucy reminds me of something most important at this moment. And that is that evolution is not over. Even though we may have iPhones and laptops and TikTok and all the other amazing things that are technological inventions, we, as a species, our our understanding of who we are and our behavior has become frozen in time. Actually, if you look at it, especially over the last, 200,000 years, but let's reduce that to 5,000 years, we have sought to organize ourselves basically the same way, looking for the great man. Of course, all of us should know by now there is no such thing, in case we're confused about that. We have organized ourselves based on fear, on scarcity, and periodically moments and spaces in which we have organized ourselves to be in harmony with one another. And what I've noticed as I've looked at this, when we organize ourselves to be in harmony with one another, we find a new harmony with the earth. A poem came up for me. I'll read to you. I am the earth, even when I wake up crying. These are the earth's tears. The ocean of suffering belongs to her. I am the earth speaking to you now, and you are the earth listening to me with your precious ears. I am the earth walking through my doubts and fears and hurts and gifts and hopes and talents and dreams and sadness and loneliness and joy. But I am also the rain falling, the cricket speaking, the birds singing with joys that bless the world. I'm getting washed all over by my tears and my hopes as the rain continues to fall. I am celebrating the miracle of every earth breath, every earth sigh, every earth tear, every earth smile, every earth hug, and every earth touch of kindness that brings me home. I am the earth, and so are you. The pursuit of justice has been very long in the human species, personal, collective, institutional, systemic, all of whom have been beset both by hope, but also by frailty, by superstition, by stereotype, by wickedness, and by error. In my view, we have to rethink the entire concept of justice, because the concept of justice we inherited from a colonial paradigm. And still in that paradigm, my own experience is that justice is not possible. Not lived justice. Not the justice of love in public, as Cornel West has mentioned. Last week, I watched the beauty of John Lewis's funeral. And one of the speakers I had a chance to meet many years ago in California at the university. We were on a panel. His name was James Lawson, and James Lawson is the individual Martin Luther King sent to India to learn from Gandhi the methodology of nonviolent living. It is not nonviolent protest. It is nonviolent life. It's what the teaching is all about. And our panel, which James Lawson led, he asked us all from different traditions, and a native shaman, Catholic priest, imam from mosque, Jewish rabbi, etc., a whole gathering of us. What does justice mean in your tradition? And after an hour or so at the end, and we all spoke, he said, I don't understand. We've all basically said the same thing. Why have we not realized it yet in the possibility of its fullness? And so I consider that a meditation for myself. And during that panel, I described justice as the embodiment of the Brahmaviharas. Justice as love, true love, as Thich Nhat Hanh refers to it. But we tend to think about the Brahmaviharas and the practices of equanimity and joy and compassion and loving kindness as interpersonal. We must move our understanding of these energies into our collective existence. What would it mean to have a school system that operated out of equanimity? What would it mean to live in a community in which there was shared joy instead of shared jealousy? What would it mean to live and work in an organization in which compassion was favored, respected, understood? And what would it mean to live in a world in which loving kindness was the aim of our relationships with one another? It is very clear to me that we have not decided as a species how to be together. We've not even decided we want to be together, but we are here. And so part of our great task, in my mind, is to apply our mindfulness path beyond the personal, beyond the interpersonal, into our imagination of what it means to be collective and what it means to have institutions, because the research shows justice has become more difficult to achieve the more institutionalized it becomes, because it moves away from being a human being and moves into constructs and cleverness and rules designed by the colonial mind to hold on to power. And so for me, if we don't learn how to use an image from Einstein, you can't solve a problem at the same level of energy that created it. The opportunity I see is for us to create the new. Justice, understanding of what that means for human beings. In our families, what does it mean to be just in our families? In our workplace? In our community? In ourselves? How can we have justice outside of ourselves if we cannot love and have justice inside of ourselves? We can't show and experience equanimity, evenness of mind in ourselves, joy in ourselves, compassion for ourselves, and loving kindness toward ourselves. These are not one way or the other. They are like yin-yang principles and energies in action. I am certain, as I can be, that we in fact have entered something that has never occurred in human species. We are at this moment, all over this planet, sometimes hidden, sometimes whispered, sometimes danced, sometimes in poetry, sometimes in song. We are creating the new narrative. And that new narrative has the energy of a new world soul, a new understanding of what it means to be grounded together in this place, this remarkable planet, with all of life around us and within us. To me, our practice is to take our calm we generate in Shamanta and the stability we generate in our concentration and the insight we generate through those things to look into our lives, our social lives, our economic lives, our political lives, our cultural lives, because right now, all of the vitality of this life has been robbed from us. Our breath has been stolen. This morning, I had an experience in meditation of realizing how hurt I am. And I don't mean the small I mean the hurt of millions, of the dispossessed, of the lost, of the homeless, of the murdered, of the starving. This hurt is not my hurt. It is the hurt. It is the suffering. And I ask myself, what is it that I need to do in myself and in my world to shift this pattern, to shift this ongoing samsara, to reclaim my life from being kidnapped by greed or hate or delusion or conceit? A few weeks ago, I remembered an old poem you may know. It's really a nursery rhyme. Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men could not put Humpty Dumpty back together again. We are now living in a moment like that, where if you haven't realized it already, no one is in charge of the world. And my experience of this, the experience of not being in charge, I landed in Paris once years ago, and there was a strike on, so there was nobody at the luggage place where they turn around. There was nobody there taking luggage off, so I decided I would. So for me, our structures are failing. I hope you understand that. And they're failing because they have naturally run out of time. The first realizations of great beings mentions the impermanence of social structures and political systems. This is what we're now experiencing. The pandemic brings it home. Our racialized reckoning brings it home, that the way we have been, we can be no longer. And what does that mean? It can get overwhelming to think about that. So for me, I use an image I learned many years ago. When you think of a wave, and there's two great movements in a wave. One is at the crest, at the top, the emergence, and the other is at the trough, and the down, the last life of the wave, becoming the new life of the wave. What we must do is not get caught in the trough. We must put our hearts and minds in practice on the crest, on what is rising in us. And it is rising around this world, in art, in music, in poetry, in dance. Our very gathering here is an indication of the rising of what in Greek or Latin would be called the anima mundi, a world soul. But we've never had a world soul before. We've been convinced that we live in nations and states here and prefectures in Japan. We've been convinced that these inventions we've created are real. And if nothing else, then you think of the pandemic as a teacher. The pandemic is teaching all of us, all these constructions are illusions when you live on the earth. And this, for me, so we're seeing the meltdown of the white male superiority paradigm. Now, I know it's like an iceberg, and I know when an iceberg melts, there's more at the bottom than at the top, but there is work to be done at the level of what my dear teacher before me called the ground reversal, or in Buddhism, transformation at the base of our consciousness. And for me, that transformation is beyond using the path of mindfulness to soothe ourselves, though we must be soothed because we are hurt and we are damaged and we are afraid. But we need to understand our damage and our hurt and our pain are also empty of a separate self. These are not solid objects blocking us. These are energies that have come together, but they are still energies and therefore can be transformed, as all energy is designed to be transformed. So we have been stopped by nature herself. Some years ago, Thich Nhat Hanh gave a talk about we have created a system that we don't know how to stop. And the pandemic, Mother Nature herself decided to slow us down enough so we can ask the question, what is the purpose of our life? What is the purpose of a human society? Yes, our nervous systems are in a state of survival physiology. So what I am doing and I am learning to do is to, number one, bring the practice of mindfulness of the body deeper into my nervous system and learning how my nervous system is activated, reactivated by fear, by flight, by confusion, and by threat, so I can self-regulate my emotions, my thoughts, the movement of my heart. Self-regulation is the first key. And so I've spent the last 5 years and continue to learn about trauma, resiliency, somatic experiencing. But for me, it's important to understand this is not personal psychology. It is biology. So not only do we not understand who we are, we don't have a clear understanding of what we are. And so you can see it in the streets, our traumatic reactions on full display, our fighting, our running away, our living in the delusion that the virus has an identity, that it cares about us, that it knows how we vote, it knows how we shop. This is an illusion about living on this planet. And so that's the first practice for me, to also understand how to take our training and concentration and looking deep and to turn that towards our imagination. I know the education system we don't want. What's the education system we do want? And don't turn that over to somebody else to create. Start small, do it at home, do it with your friends. We have to also work on our language for the world, and our language from one another is colonial language. And so part of our journey is creating new ways to describe ourselves, new ways to describe what it means to be a part of this remarkable planetary experience as human beings, and to ask this question and maybe journal for yourself. How do you want to live? How do you think we should live together in love? And I don't mean People magazine love. I mean deep, abiding love, deep respect, deep care. And I have lived and worked in many places around the world in great suffering and not great suffering. And I have discovered that every place I have worked, the only thing people are actually learning for is to be loved. But I think we think of love as some kind of simply emotional thing. When I studied theology, I learned about 3 kinds of love: witnessing love, truth-telling love. So this is a practice. Also, Thai would remind us, deep listening love. I'm aghast at how many people's voices are not heard. How many humans who breathe are not counted as real, but as numbers. I'm not going to even go into our military horror of how we live together in this world, or the nuclear potential for self-destruction we have. But you should know we have that potential and not hide from it in ourselves or in our society. Years ago, Margaret Mead was asked the question about what were the signs of civilization. And her answer was, a student expected artifacts and fish hooks and clay pots and stones, but her answer was, the first sign of civilization in ancient culture was the thigh bone that had been broken and then healed. And she went on to explain, in the animal kingdom, which we are, if you break your leg, you die because you cannot run from danger. You can't get to the river to get a drink or hunt for food. You become the feast of others. A broken femur that has been healed, or the thigh bone that has been healed, is proof that someone took time to stay with that person so they could recover. She ends her story by saying, helping someone through difficulty is where civilization starts. But we have designed a civilization, we live in a civilization where if you're hurt, you're punished. You are discarded. We walk by people laying on the streets as if they're stones. And we become stones as we walk by them without having ourselves stopped in our momentum of busyness. Mindfulness, the second piece of this for me, is about mindfulness of resilience. This is about mindfulness of the body and really learning how our body works and how to befriend our body and its reactions to our life, to our fear, to our anxiousness, to our existential crisis of impermanence, which of course is at the root of white supremacy, is the existential crisis of impermanence. And all senses of superiority are having yet come to terms with what it means to be a human being. I have 3 mantras I practice with these days. The first one is to stand up in the house of belonging. Act like you are a human being on this planet with a precious life on your hands. Stand up as if you belong here, like the trees and the rocks and the river and the mountains and the hawk and the eagle and the prairie dog. Stand up. My second mantra I practice with daily is take your seat at the table of healing and transformation. Don't let someone else take your seat. You have unique contributions and talents and gifts and healing that must occur that only you can do. So figure out where that is for you as your journey goes on. And that table may shift from time to time. That's fine. The practice is the same. Whatever table you're at, to heal and transform your suffering so it does not leak out into history. The third mantra I'm practicing with is ride the winds of change unafraid. Settle into the doors of liberation that we are taught, of aimlessness, of dwelling in the present moment without fear or reactivity. To cultivate our very best energies and potentials in us and allow those very best energies and potentials to leak out into the world, into all of our relations, as my native teachers would remind me. Being unafraid is not the experience of non-fear. It is the experience of transforming the energy of fear into courage, into imagination. So I would invite us all to not get caught in the trough, but to bring our gifts and talents and imagination and inspiration to creating the world we want. And however small we can do it, in our garden, at our kitchen table, in our sangha, in our business, in how we walk, in how we smile. Take good care.
Thank you, dear brother, dear teacher. That was
Sure.
beautiful. Both of you were amazing. We gave you more time because we didn't really want to stop you in full flow.
Oh, thank you.
If that's okay, there's a time for some questions now.
Great.
So please, if you wish to ask a question, you can either put it into the chat, and Amaragita or Larry will take the opportunity to respond. Alternatively, you can raise your hands using the functionality of Zoom, and we'll unmute you so you can ask your questions. Just remember to be brief, and the answer can be long, just so that everyone have the opportunities to share or to ask a question. Thank you so much. I see Rita has her hand raised, so we'll unmute her.
Hello.
Hi, Rita.
Hi. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for both of your shares today. Really appreciated. I just wanted to firstly just say that coming into this gathering, initially I felt really uncomfortable with so many people here and noticing that there were very few people of color. There might be more, but I didn't see everyone's faces. And my initial reaction was to let me leave this meeting. And I'm glad I stayed. But I guess the question for me is, even in spiritual communities and circles like this and others that I am part of, I wanted you to touch on, maybe both of you a little bit, on the spiritual bypassing. You kind of touched on it a little bit, and I think Amaragita did. But I just wanted to say a little bit more about how to work in those communities who want to, get to the lightness and joy and all of that, but without doing this deeper inner work. So that's, sorry, long question, but thank you.
Thank you. Please, sister.
Yeah. I think that we need to become more able to feel comfortable with people's pain, because otherwise we use our spiritual teachings to avoid hearing pain, and that's partly because we feel the pain. I saw a T-shirt that one of the Trump supporters had on, which said, "It's okay to be white." And I just thought, wow, that there is so much discomfort arising out of racism that, it's people are so defensive that they go into defensive and therefore bypassing, rather than turning towards and listening, the deep listening that Larry was talking about. So I think it's a question of not giving up and keep speaking our truth and keep knocking on the door and keep calling it out. But it's definitely, we'll use anything to avoid this existential insecurity, even our spiritual traditions. So, I think it's just a question of just being aware of that and not backing off, but just continuing to communicate what we need to communicate, and also speak about what it is we want to see, not just what we don't want to see. So that's my tuppence.
I would say for me, it is about training ourselves to live in our actual bodies and not in the thoughts in our heads. One of the great errors, I would say spiritually, of the entire colonial model is the idea that I think, therefore I am. When we in fact know as practitioners that, as Thich Nhat Hanh has said it, I think, therefore I am not. I am disconnected from my human experience. I'm disconnected from my emotional world, from my intimacy, from my impact. And so for me, it's helpful to understand Buddhism as a body-centered eco-spirituality, which I think is consistent throughout history as mindfulness is actually applied and not simply just talked about, or not simply used simply as a technique to bypass discomfort. So the invitation for me is about learning about our own bodies, our own emotional existence, and developing some maturity here. I see people out on the streets here in the US behaving like 4-year-olds as somebody took their lollipop away. It's just astounding, except we know this is true of the species worldwide. It's so easy for us to get seduced away from coming home to ourselves. And if we've not been trained how to come home to ourselves, it's, you know, we live in a society that's basically trained us not to come home to ourselves. And so we also don't have the skills. We have the capacity, but we need training, literal training in how to be with our bodies, how to be with our emotions, how to be with our pain, be with our grief. We don't know. And so we just react, which does not heal us or transform our suffering.
So thank you, Amaragita and Larry. There is a question in the chat, which is, and I'll read that out. Thank you, teachers, for the deep Dharma gift today. Could you please share thought on accountability to Black, Indigenous, people of color practitioners in this work by white practitioners? So I think the question is, what work has been done in this area by white practitioners around Black, Indigenous, people of color practitioners? So how they've taken responsibility or accountability.
Larry, do you want to?
Sure. I have no idea. I've not spent my time trying to figure that out. I've spent my time learning how to handle my own suffering and my own pain and my own grief and my own trauma. I think the most important thing, quote unquote, white practitioners can do is to learn the skill of energetic safety. We know from trauma research, whether it's people who went and survived the Holocaust or otherwise, that safety is the fundamental foundation of healing traumatic experience. And the issue many people find in sanghas that are not people of color centric is the experience of safety is not there, whether people in that circle even know that. And so I think developing skills and learning how to create safety, learning how to use and read and understand energy. So everything is not just about words, as the Euro construct would teach us. Life is also about energy, not just about the matter, whether that matter is physical or linguistic. And so for me, unless we begin to understand ourselves in light of the first two laws of thermodynamics, that we are both matter and energy, If we stay only understanding ourselves as matter, we will remain trapped in the model of matter that was created by the colonial mind. So I think I can't think as a white person. I don't know how to do that. I have no desire to do that. I can think like a human being, which is what I am. And so as a human being, I would say, learn how to create safety for yourself inside, space inside, equanimity inside of yourself, so you can receive what life brings you. Hard conversations, difficult comments. When I first heard the title White Fragility, I actually started laughing because I find it a little bit ridiculous, given the experience that Black and brown peoples have had all over this planet. The idea that your discomfort should become elevated as opposed to anyone else's, to me, is still in the framework of the white supremacy model. So also, if you are a white person, not just brown or Black or any other tone, of which, by the way, there's 4,000 shades of human beings, in the latest research I read, that we become capable of creating an environment of welcome, of safety. And that's not been the structure of the modern Western world. Every place else in the world I've ever lived and worked, and I've had the pleasure and privilege of being many, being welcome was always at the foundation of things. Safety was always at the foundation of things. Even if I was working in the middle of the ghetto of Haripurkur in Calcutta, safety, community, welcoming was always present. And so our modern stuff, there's no welcoming. You go to work and you say your mother died, you have 3 days off. What understanding of grief is that? What understanding of humanity is that? So we have created this system, this condition, all of us, to what James Lawson called in his talk at John Lewis's funeral, plantation economics. A few of us make it off the plantation and make a little money and then tell everyone the system's fine. And yes, it's killing us, killing our children, killing our families. So safety, practice safety for yourself and how to create it for others would be my response.
Thank you very much, Larry. I'm
Sure.
afraid, thank you. We've reached the end of our session. I'm conscious of honoring everyone's time.
Good.
So we will just wind down, handing over to Satya to say the final words. Thank you, Satya.
Thanks, Rahina. So this is the credits, rolling credits. I want to really thank Amaragita and Dr. Larry Ward for their Dharma, which will really resonate. It feels like it's going to continue resonating within me for a long time, and especially the 3 questions and the 4 photos. Really grateful to you all for being here, and to Plum Village for offering us the hosting account for tonight, and to Gareth, who did all the technical wizardry stuff, and to Rahina for her very full of love attention to all the details around this evening's event, which has held us all nice and safely and created a beautiful space. Been lovely to work with you, Rahina. I want to transfer all the merit that we generated this evening, and I'm a Pure Land Buddhist, so I'll ask Amitabha to help us to pass it on, everything we've received this evening. By the grace that we receive through Amitabha's vows, may we be moved to deeds for the benefit of all. By the grace that we receive through Amitabha's vows, may we be moved to deeds for the benefit of all. And talking of merit, if you would please give generously to Amaragita and Dr. Larry Ward, they will be offering some of the dana to themselves, as it's so important to value this precious, their precious time and their precious dharma, and also giving some money to charity. And if you'd like to give us feedback about this evening or say anything about tonight, do feel free to put it on the chat. So thank you all so much for being here, and I will hand back to Rahina to complete the circle with her bell.
Thank you, dear friends. Have a safe journey back to one room to another. And we'll play out with the slide and some music.
One heart, one life. We are one family, one earth. One heart, one life. We are one family, one earth. And together we can make a difference in our world. Every creed and color, every boy and girl, all of creation, no separation. We are one, one heart. One heart, one life. We are one family, one earth. One heart, one life. We are one family, one earth. And together we can make a difference in our world. Every creed and color, every boy and girl, all of creation, no separation. We are one heart. Even though it seems we are so far apart, and many times we're feeling all alone, the truth of who we are has been here from the start. We are one heart. Together we can make a difference in our world. Every creed and color, every boy and girl, all of creation,